The movie begins with a boy named Harold, who lives inside a children's storybook. Harold has a magical purple pen, and he can use it to draw anything he wants and turn it into reality. Harold draws two animals to be his friends and names them Eo and Berkey. Harold spends his time with his friends and they have a great time together. Before they go to sleep each night, they are spoken to by the book's author. But Harold and his friends don't know the author's name, so they call him the Old Man. As days go by, Harold grows older and starts to desire seeing the Old Man. But the Old Man tells him that it's impossible because he lives in the real world. However, Harold's curiosity gets the best of him. The next day, he prepares a long list of questions about the real world and calls out to the Old Man to answer him. But the Old Man doesn't respond. Harold decides to draw a door to go to the real and look for the Old Man. When he opens the door, Harold bids farewell to his friends and asks them to wait for him until he returns. Then, he crosses through the door. When he steps into the real world, people around him are puzzled, and he thinks he's in a three-dimensional world. At that moment, Berkey wants to cross through the door to follow Harold, but Eo is afraid to do so. Berkey pulls a thorn from her back and pokes Eo with it, forcing him to cross through the door, but the door accidentally closes on Berkey. When they arrive in the real world, Eo looks in a mirror and starts screaming when he finds that he has turned into a human. At the same time, Harold sees a man jogging, so he runs alongside him and asks, "Who are you running from?" The man is confused by Harold's words, thinks he's crazy, and comments on his clothes. Harold enters a clothing store and changes his outfit to match what humans wear. Then, they meet an old man and think that he is the old man who used to talk to them. But the old man is scared of them and walks away. They realize that he isn't the man they're looking for. Harold decides to search for the old man somewhere else. He pulls out his magical pen, draws a wheel, turns it into a real wheel, and rides it with Eo to search for the old man. Meanwhile, Berkey manages to open the door and cross into the real world, appearing as a human girl. Unlike Eo, Berkey is happy to have become a human. We then shift to a woman named Terry, who is in her car with her son Milo. It's clear that Milo is introverted and has no friends, to the point that he has invented an imaginary friend named Tom and always talks to him. Terry tries to talk to Milo to get him to stop doing that, but suddenly she sees Harold and Eo in front of her and crashes into them with the car. Terry gets out to check on them and finds that they are okay and no one is hurt. She notices that the car tire was damaged in the accident and gets very upset because she doesn't have a spare tire. She pulls out her phone to call the repair shop. While she's busy with the call, Harold pulls out his magical pen, draws a car tire, and turns the drawing into a real tire. At that moment, Milo sees them and is surprised by what's happening. Terry brings him into the car and thanks Harold for his help. They get to know each other and Terry decides to take them home so they can rest and continue their journey the next day. When they arrive, she lets them sleep in the upstairs room. At that moment, Harold notices a musical note and learns from Terry that she used to play the piano and once dreamed of becoming a famous pianist. However, all her dreams were shattered after her husband passed away, as she had to take on the responsibility of the house and raising Milo. Eventually, she ended up working as a supermarket employee. At night, Harold sits with Milo. Milo asks him, "How did you make that car tire?" Harold shows him the magical pen and draws a butterfly, turning it into a real butterfly. Then, Harold gives Milo the pen and asks him to draw anything that comes to mind. Milo draws a spider with wings and the spider becomes real. It turns out that the spider is wild, as it attacks the butterfly and eats it. At the same time, Berkey's walking down the street and feels cold. She sees a purple flower in front of a house and remembers that Harold and Eo might be in this place. However, when she enters the house, she doesn't find them, but she sees a jacket hanging on a coat rack, so she takes it and wears it. Then she goes to the kitchen to eat, and suddenly, she hears the homeowners saying they have called the police. Berkey quickly escapes from the house before the police arrive and arrest her. The next day, Berkey sits at the table and finds a lot of food, amazed by it. Afterward, she sees Harold, Milo, and Eo sitting in the garden having breakfast. She asks them where they got all this food from, and Milo tells her that Harold made it using the magic pen. He also tells her that Harold colored the front of the house purple with the pen, but Terry doesn't believe him and thinks Harold is playing some kind of magic trick. Terry pulls Harold aside and tells him that she can't handle more fantasies and that she's already busy enough with her son's imaginary friend. She then says she's going to work and tells Milo to go to school. She also tells Harold and Eo that they need to leave. After Terry leaves, Harold takes the magic pen out of his pocket, breaks off a piece, and gives it to Milo. Milo is overjoyed and thanks him. Then Milo decides he won't go to school and joins Harold and Eo in searching for the old man. When Milo realizes they don't know where to start, he takes them to the library. There, he introduces them to Gary the librarian, who is an old friend of Terry from their university days. Gary asks Harold and Io for the name of the old man they're looking for, but they are surprised to realize they don't know his name. Gary laughs and tells them they don't need the internet to find the old man. It would be better to take a plane and write him a message in the sky. Strangely enough, Harold calls Gary a genius because he loves the idea of the plane. They then head out to the street, and Harold uses the magic pen to draw a plane and turns it into a real one. The moment Gary sees what's happening, he is shocked because he knows the name of the book that tells Harold's story and the purple pen, so he goes back to the library to find it. Meanwhile, Harold takes Milo and flies the plane into the sky. Milo asks him to write his mom's phone number in smoke next to the message to the old man. Harold is confused by Milo's request, but when they land, they look at the sky and are very impressed with what they've done. Soon, elderly men start calling Terry thinking she's looking for an old man to marry, but Terry rejects every caller and hangs up on them, puzzled by the number of calls she's. At night, Harold draws a piano for Terry. Without her noticing, then surprises her and asks her to play it. Terry is delighted and starts playing, and it turns out her music is beautiful and draws the attention of people in the garden who gather around to enjoy it. When she finishes, everyone applauds her. At that moment, Gary arrives at the scene and tells Harold and Io that he's found the old man they've been searching for. They bid farewell to Terry and Milo and leave with Gary. Then, they all sit together as Gary shows them the book they used to live in, and they discover that the author's name is John, which means John is the old man who was talking to them all along. Now, the search will be much easier because they know his address and will go to him. At that moment, Berkey appears very happy that she has finally found them, but the police arrive and arrest her. When they find out that Harold and Io are her friends, they arrest them too. At the police station, the officers take the magic pen from Harold, which means Harold and his friends have no way to escape. Then, a policeman opens the cell to bring in another criminal, and Harold and his friends seize the opportunity. They hide until they can get out of the cell, then quickly move to retrieve the magic pen and give it to Harold. They find a large iron ball that destroys the cell wall, allowing Harold and his friends to escape quickly. The next day, Milo is at school, and two of his bully classmates take his whistle and lock him in the storage room. Milo uses the piece of the magic pen Harold gave him and draws his imaginary friend Carl. The children are terrified when they hear loud banging on the storage room door, and their fear grows when they see Carl, who turns out to be a flying dragon. Carl attacks them, takes the whistle, and returns it to Milo. At that moment, Milo is very happy and thanks Carl. After that, Milo leaves school and finds Harold and his friends waiting for him. Milo meets Berkey and is very happy that Harold and his friends have returned. At that moment, Harold tells Milo that they've learned the name of the man they've been searching for. So Milo looks him up on the internet and finds his home address. After that, they all go to the house, but they are shocked to learn that John has died and that his wife has turned the house into a museum for his works. Harold is deeply saddened by John's death. At that moment, Terry arrives, having tracked down her son's location through his phone. She is very angry with Milo for not returning home and going with Harold instead. She tells Harold to stay away from her son, then leaves. Due to Harold's frustration, the power of the magic pen weakens, and everything he had drawn begins to disappear. The first to vanish are his friends, Io and Berkey. At the same time, Terry discovers that the car tire Harold had drawn has disappeared, causing the car to break down on the road. Milo sees Harold with Gary in the car and seizes the opportunity to realize that something is wrong, especially since Harold is alone without his friends. Milo wants to follow Harold to help him, but Terry refuses and tells him to forget about Harold and stop thinking of him. When they get home, Milo sneaks away from his mother, grabs his bike, and goes to search for Harold. Meanwhile, Harold is in the library with Gary. Gary takes advantage of Harold's sadness and disappointment, asking him to give him the magic pen, telling him that it is no longer useful after John's death. Gary persuades Harold, and Harold hands him the pen. However, Harold is shocked when Gary uses the magic pen's power to break through the wall. At that point, Gary's evil intentions are revealed. He wants to get revenge on all the publishers who rejected his novel. Harold tries to convince Gary not to use the magic pen's power for evil, but Gary ignores him and insists on carrying out his plan. At that moment, Milo arrives and wants to save Harold, but Gary captures him and ties him up next to Harold. Gary then tells them that he will use the magic pen's power to bring his novel to life, where he will become the heroic protagonist and marry the princess he loves. Gary reveals that the princess is Terry, as he has loved her for a long time and had always hoped to. After that, Gary leaves. When Gary steps out of the library, he draws a war chariot, gets on it, and leaves the place. At this point, Harold is devastated by everything that has happened to him in the real world, but Milo talks to him and manages to lift him out of his sadness. Then Milo pulls out the piece of the magic pen from his pocket, and he and Harold use it to draw a balloon flying off in search of Gary. Meanwhile, Terry discovers that Milo is not at home and she becomes worried and quickly goes out to look for him. But she is surprised when she finds that the house has turned purple. Returning to Harold and Milo, they spot Gary driving his chariot down the street. When he reaches the city park, they manage to knock him off his chariot. Then they descend from the balloon, and Harold stands before Gary, telling him that he managed to escape using the piece of the magic pen he had. Gary responds by saying that he has a larger part of the pen, which means Harold won't be able to defeat him. But Harold ignores his words and engages him in a fight, with both drawing their own weapons to battle. In the end, Harold manages to defeat Gary and is about to take the pen from him, but Gary grabs the pen and swallows it. After that, Gary's body absorbs the power of the magic pen, and he transforms into the heroic character from his novel. At this moment, Terry arrives and looks at Milo. As soon as Gary sees her, he offers her a chance to join him, telling her he will marry her and make her a princess in the world he plans to create. But Terry refuses and wants to take her son and escape. Gary uses his power and lava starts flowing from every direction. Harold tries to help them, but he falls to the ground and the pen flies out of his hand, landing far away from him. Suddenly, Carl Milo's imaginary friend appears and attacks Gary, but Gary strikes him down. At this moment, Harold wishes his friends were there to help him. Suddenly, Berkey and Io appear, as Harold has regained his full confidence, and everything drawn by the magic pen returns to its original state. Harold tells his friends that he lost the piece of the magic pen, so Berkey uses her strong sense of smell to find the missing piece. She throws it to Harold, but Gary stands in his way and says that nothing Harold draws will be able to stop him. But Harold surprises Gary by drawing the flying spider that Milo had drawn earlier. The spider attacks Gary and enters his mouth. Then Berkey comes and strikes Gary on the back. Frightened, Gary transforms into his animal form and attacks Gary, delivering a powerful blow. At the same moment, the spider comes out of Gary's mouth with the magic pen that Gary had swallowed. After that, Gary's power disappears and everything in the place returns to normal. At this point, Carl wakes up and goes to Milo to check on him, while Harold approaches Gary to make sure he's okay. Gary apologizes to Harold for what he did and says that all he wanted was to live in the world he had imagined for himself. Harold uses the magic pen and draws a large door. He then opens it in front of Gary, revealing the world Gary had imagined. The heroine of Gary's story appears a version of Terry, and Gary thanks Harold before walking through the door, transforming into the hero of the story he had written. Afterward, Harold closes the door and Carl comes and breathes fire from his mouth to burn the door, ensuring that Gary doesn't return to the real world again. The next day, everyone goes to the house of John, the author of the book in which Harold and his friends live. Everyone is very happy with the drawings they see in the place. John's wife arrives and gives Harold a letter from John. Harold opens the letter and finds that John tells him he intended to leave him the magic pen so he could use his imagination and create his own story. After that, Harold draws a door and opens it to continue his story with his friends. Harold and his friends bid farewell to Milo and Terry, and they walk through the door, returning to the world they live in. That night, Milo returns home and plays with Carl. Meanwhile, Gary remains in his own world, searching for Terry until he finally finds her. When he sees her, he immediately proposes marriage, but he is shocked to discover that she loves someone else and is going to marry him.